Hello there, students. This is the second lecture of Unit 3, and it is about voter behavior and citizen participation. There are two articles that you'll be reading at the end, so make sure that you check out those attachments. Alright, so we've got two definitions here, political efficacy and civic duty. The U.S. typically has lower voter turnouts, than other democracies, and there are some reasons for it. Some states have stricter rules on early voting. Some have voter ID laws. Everyone votes on a Tuesday, which isn't the most convenient for the working class or for people without transportation, which is a bigger percentage of the U.S. population than you'd think. So we have pretty low turnout compared to other countries. Some argue that it's a rational choice to not vote. There is a theory that when people are voting less, it's a sign that they're happy with the status quo, they're happy with how things are going. That theory really feeds into this idea that people tend to vote and they tend to be more politically active when they're angry. Political efficacy is the belief that one's political participation really does matter. So, you should participate because you can affect real change. And then civic duty is the belief that it's patriotic and incredibly important to support a democratic government by voting. That's what makes democracy work, is by participation. This is a chart of presidential turnout rates between 1948 and 2008. I should update this. It hasn't been updated for the last election, but it has been updated for 2012. You can see that we dip in the 80s and we dip in the 90s, and then it shoots back up. Usually at times when there's some sort of crisis going on. There was a small financial, not collapse, that's too big of a word, a recession that happened in the late 80s, early 90s, which potentially caused voter participation to go up. Of course, 2000 was a pretty heated election, but the election after that, with the war in Iraq and the family values, was arguably, more heated. And then the 2008 election was a historic election, so people were participating potentially for that reason, among others. So registration procedures for voting differ from state to state. And voting registration is just simply a system adopted by states that require voters to register well in advance of election day. And the reason that we do that is to help prevent voter fraud, which was a real issue in the late 1800s, early 1900s, but has become increasingly less and less common. For example, in the 2012 elections, there, I think, were 3 identified cases of voter fraud in North Carolina, so, not nearly the numbers you need to sway any kind of election. That's why, if you want to hack into our election system, it doesn't make sense to hack into the actual voting part of it. You hack the information, like Russia. Anyway, registration procedures differ from state to state. The Motor Voter Act is a law that most states enacted in the 90s, and it required states to permit people to register to vote when they applied for their driver's licenses, making it really easy, especially for young people, to register to vote. And like I said, states' registration rules vary from state to state. There are some states that if you registered but you haven't been active in any election for a certain amount of years, they'll actually purge you from the voter list. So you have to re-register if you want to vote, and that's caused some problems in recent elections, especially people who thought that they were registered to vote, but they weren't. And North Carolina recently got rid of a lot of their voter registration. Let's see, when was it? In 2010, 2011, they got rid of a lot of their ways to make voter registration easier and more streamlined. They got rid of the motor voter part of the law. You have to register months in advance, earlier than you were required to before. You can't register before you're 18, so even if you will be 18 on election day, you can't register prior to that. And some of those have been overturned, but that's only been within the last year. As far as people that vote go, though, people, again, with more education are more likely to vote. That is actually the most important factor. The higher your education level, the more likely it is that you will vote in every election, not just presidential. Older people are more likely to vote, white people are more likely to vote, but other ethnicities are higher if they have a comparable education. So if we're comparing like 4-year degree Caucasian people to 4-year degree Latinos, the Latino group would be more likely to vote than the white people. Women are more likely to vote than men. Married people are more likely to vote than single people. Union members are more likely to vote than non-union members. So these traits are cumulative. Possessing several of them adds up. So, like, for example, if you are an older, well-educated female, you're significantly more likely to vote than an older African-American male who's unmarried. So they stack up. This is one of my favorite political cartoons. Didn't vote, don't complain. There are some issues with it, of course, though. There was a really, I don't want to call it funny, but it was kind of funny. Hold on. Okay, good. Just want to make sure my camera was going. There was a funny news bit in December. There were some protests going on in California, and CNN was there interviewing people that were protesting, and they interviewed this one guy who was shirtless and screaming, and he had a sign, and they were like, "Why are you out here?" And he was like, I just hate Donald Trump. And they were like, "Oh, so you voted for Hillary?" And he was like, "No, I didn't vote." And then CNN spent a long time making fun of him. But I think that there were a lot of people like him in the past election who chose not to vote because they were making a kind of a political stance. They didn't agree with either of the candidates, and therefore they were going to protest by not voting. Now, that's kind of a silly way to protest, but that doesn't mean it's not a legitimate way to protest. All right, so there is the mandate theory of elections. This is the idea that if the winning candidate has a mandate from the people, that the winning candidate has a mandate from the people to carry out his or her platforms in politics. Politicians like this theory better than political scientists do, and you've heard actually quite a few mentions of the mandate theory coming from Donald Trump's White House, specifically with, I think we listened to one of his White House advisors the other day say, look, he has a mandate from the people. He was elected. He can do the immigration ban if he wants. He can do X, Y, and Z. He has the mandate. So this is something you hear more from politicians than political scientists, but it is a theory of elections. Which leads us to party identification. People generally vote with the party that they agree with, though it is becoming more and more common for people to identify as independent and kind of flip-flop back and forth between elections as to which party they stick with. The rise of candidate-centered politics has really started to change that. A lot more voters are more individualistic, and they tend to vote based on characteristics of candidates, which have become increasingly more important than the party. I think one of the problems that Hillary Clinton really had in the 2016 election was that she just had trouble connecting individually with voters. And Donald Trump connected really well with certain types of voters. Like, he had people really psyched up about him. There were people, willing to vote for Hillary Clinton, but there wasn't like a large group of people that were really excited about it. Barack Obama is a good example of candidate-centered politics as well. Even people that maybe didn't agree with his policies all the time loved his personality, and he was incredibly popular. Bernie Sanders is another good example of that. If you want to run for office as a candidate, you want a good visual image. The most important dimensions that you want to project are integrity, reliability, and competence. And personality still plays a pretty major role, obviously. These are the 2016 Republican candidates. Oops. So policy voting. This is when you base your vote choice on issue preferences, and this happens in various elections. I think we talked about the 2004 election and how the Republicans were able to brand it as like a family-based, like kind of family values, tradition, anti-abortion race. And the Democrats were just not very good at framing it as an anti-war race. So when you have issue-based preferences, it's really important to know where your candidate stands on an issue so that you can evaluate the differences between the candidates. Candidates can be ambiguous on issues and frequently will try to be ambiguous on issues, just so they're more likable to a larger crowd of people. The press tends to focus on these so-called horse race of the election, not necessarily the issues. You know, who's ahead in the polls, who can they get on for an interview, and if you have any criticism of the press, it's that they don't cover things that are important, not necessarily that they're corrupt or wrong. It's just their focus is somewhere else. Today's candidates are forced to take a clear stand in the party primaries because there's so much of a media circus and hype centered around the primaries. So you really have to define who you are by the end of the primary process. One of the things that Bernie Sanders did with Hillary Clinton in the primary process, because he stayed in so long, was he really pushed her to become more left of center than she had been before in the primaries. Arguably, that made her more desirable to Democrats, but on the other hand, it might have made her less desirable to Democrats because she might have been seen as a flip-flopper. Politics are hard. All right. So, hot topic in voting. This is actually your flipped assignment. You've only got one tonight. I'm going to attach 2 articles, one about voter fraud and one about voter ID laws. So I want you to evaluate which one is a bigger problem, voter fraud or voter ID. How do we fix it? And then why do other people think that the other issue that you didn't pick is a problem? So let's say you go with voter fraud as the real problem. Why do people view voter ID laws as the problem then? All right, so I'll attach those. Have a good night, and I will see you all in the morning.